Hello, everybody. My name is Stephanie Boozer with CUGC HQ, and I'd like to welcome you to today's user share, NetScaler documentation script using Nitro APIs. Our presentation today will last roughly 25 minutes, followed by a live Q&A discussion afterwards. You can type your questions into the question area of the GoToWebinar control panel at any time during the webinar, and they will be answered live after the presentation. Presenting for us today are Iain Brighton and Barry Schiffer. Iain is a steering committee member of the UK CUGC and founder and consultant at Virtual Engine. Barry is a CTP, leader of the Dutch CUGC, and an IT architect at SLTN Enter Access. And with that, I'll hand the screen over to Iain and Barry to get us started.
So, hi everyone. This is Barry Schiffer speaking. I'm here with Iain. Iain is in the UK. I'm in the Netherlands. And we're going to talk about the new NetScaler documentation script, which will be out in a couple of days or weeks. We still have to finish up some last-minute things. So today we will show you what we have done, and especially what we have done on the Nitro API part of NetScaler. We switched to the Nitro API part, and we will show you how we utilize the Nitro API and why we moved over to it. But first I want to show you something about the documentation script. The documentation script consists of three parts. The documentation script part itself, that's the framework that was built by Iain and Carl Webster. Carl Webster on his website has about, I think, somewhere about 15 documentation scripts for all kinds of services like Citrix Send Desktop, Citrix Send App, but also for Microsoft Active Directory, the DHCP. And when I started with the first documentation script, I decided to donate the script to his website so that there is one collection of scripts, so you don't have to go to the website of Carl Webster for the AD script and then to another website for the NetScaler script. So all the NetScaler documentation scripts are on his website, just like all other scripts that were produced based on this framework. So for the next version of the script, we needed a Nitro connector so that we can use Powershell to connect to the Nitro API and have the documentation script filled with all the information from the NetScaler config. And last but not least, we also need to create all the tables and all the chapters with the NetScaler, the actual NetScaler information, so the output of all your configuration. So up till now, the latest release of the NetScaler documentation script is 2.5. Up till now, we were using the ns.conf, the configuration file of the NetScaler, to build the documentation. And although that worked fairly good, I mean, the script is being used a lot. I think we've seen about 12 or 13,000 downloads already. It's quite hard to use it for actual documentation, and the reason for that is that the ns.conf only has configured items. So whenever a setting in the NetScaler is a default setting, it won't be saved in the ns.conf. And I can show you a screenshot of what we're looking at, and that's what we see here is the creation of two load balancers. And if you look at the persistency type, that's different from the vServer than the first line in the configuration file. So, and whenever an option is not manually configured in the configuration, it won't show up in the ns.conf. So for each and every option in the NetScaler, we had to look in the ns.conf file if the option was actually there, and if the option was not there, we had to find out what the default option was and report that in the documentation. So that's pretty error prone, because when Citrix changes default settings in the NetScaler build, we had to go through literally every option that was in there to see if it was still valid, and you can imagine that it's quite hard to update it for newer version of NetScaler. So that's also why we are not yet supporting the 11.0 version. The script will work, and for 99% of what we report in the output, it will be fine. But it could be that along the way, some values will be changed by Citrix. So another problem is that because we need the ns.conf, we had to manually download it. So it was not possible to run the documentation script as a scheduled task. Lots of people requested that feature so that they could just have a scheduled task run through the NetScaler like every month, and then when something happens, then they could go back to a date and time it was still working and check what had been changed in the configuration. So what is Nitro? The NetScaler Nitro protocol allows you to configure and monitor the NetScaler appliance programmatically. That's quite important, because we can literally do everything the GUI is able to do, but then do it by using any type of script. And it doesn't require any client-side code libraries, as long as the client can natively talk over HTTP or HTTPS or TLS. And Iain will show some more in Iain's demos. We will show some more about the Nitro API and how to utilize it for the NetScaler documentation script, but also for configuring the NetScaler automatically. So if we just go to the NetScaler HTTP Nitro API in a browser, you can see that if you just go to the root of the API, you will get a lot of information. And once you go in a bit more specific, like what we did here, it will just throw all information about the load balance fee servers. And if you go in a bit deeper, so you ask for a specific load balancer, you only get the information for that specific load balancer. So although there's a lot of information there, getting this into PowerShell and into the documentation itself needed a little more work, and that's where Iain comes in, because I'm not a programmer at all, or not a PowerShell GUI at all. So that's where Iain comes in, and he created the Nitro parts of the script. And so why do we use Nitro? We use Nitro to automate the running of the script. So we are now able to run the script as a scheduled task, and we get everything out of the NetScaler, also the non-default settings. So that means that we will just ask for a specific load balance fee server option, and we'll just get it back as, and it will just always give us the value that is configured, even if it's default. So if Citrix changes anything along the way, a default setting will change, then the NetScaler script will just pick it up as it is actually configured. So I will now hand the presentation over to Iain. He will talk some more about how to utilize the Nitro API, and he will show you in some demos what will happen.
Cool. Thank you, Barry. So yeah, hopefully people can see my screen now. I do hope. It should be the PowerPoint presentation. So yeah, I'm going to run through and cover over briefly what REST and JSON are before we dig into a demo of the actual Nitro API and look at how we can query it and some of the potentially PowerShell code that's available. So as a brief introduction to REST, REST is an HTTP/HTTPS protocol where we can perform standard CRUD operations, so create, read, update, and delete operations over the standard HTTP, or ideally over TLS, so HTTPS connections. Okay, and it uses the standard HTTP verbs. So within the URL of the browser, we can specify the API endpoint that we want to connect to. And the standard HTTP GET request will obviously go and get those results and bring them back to us. But if we want to update or create new entries or delete entries within the NetScaler appliance, then we can specify different verbs in our headers of the HTTP request, etc. Okay, I think the key thing here is that we need to understand that REST APIs tend to be an architectural style. So unlike the SOAP-based XML services that we used to have that were strongly typed, etc., a lot of what we get back is we have to serialize and deserialize that information into objects. So when we send a request, we will just get a JSON string back, and that will represent some objects in some fashion, but we need to be responsible for maintaining them. Okay, so the Nitro API sends that information back to us in JSON. Okay, so we can serialize and deserialize, so we can convert to and from PowerShell objects into JSON, which is just a JavaScript object notation. Okay, so it's just a string-friendly representation.
Ian?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I don't see a PowerPoint presentation. I just see your screen.
Oh, okay. I do have PowerPoint up and running. Let me stop sharing and then share again then. Screen, showing screen.
There it comes. It must be off. I saw it for a moment. There it is.
All right, so it's all on the other screen. Okay, yeah, so I was sharing my other screen. Let me just bring all this over. Let's bring it over to here. Let's move this out of the way over there. Okay, so let me just go swing back. So apologies for that. It was supposed to be viewing my other screen. So, view, slideshow, don't use presenter view. So why is that? Oh, you gotta love PowerPoint and presentations. So hopefully you can still see this, yes? If I hit the slideshow, it ends up on my other screen for some strange reason. Primary monitor. Let's try this. There we go. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, cool. We'll stick here. So yeah, REST is an architectural style. So the endpoints can be anything that the developers would choose to put into place. Okay, so the URL we enter is going to be specific to a particular API that we're hitting against, and the results that we get back are just going to be JSON, which is a language-independent data format. It's just a string, and it can represent objects, but we have no way of strongly typing that information. So the information that we get back, we need to deserialize into some objects that we can use within, in this particular instance, within the documentation scripts. So how do we do that in PowerShell? So to talk to REST endpoints in PowerShell, we have an Invoke Web Request and an Invoke REST method. commandlets that we can use. So the Invoke Web Request is the standard HTTP GET request, which is equivalent of using a browser. In version 3, the Invoke REST method commandlet was made available, which wraps the Invoke Web Request and does some serialization and deserialization for us. And we'll see more of that in a second when I dig into some demos. Also in version 3, to go along with that Invoke REST method commandlet, is the convert from JSON and convert to JSON. So this allows us to serialize and deserialize from PowerShell objects into JSON and vice versa. So if we wanted to issue an API request to the Nitro API to get us the load balancer or the load balance, the virtual servers that are available within the NetScaler, that gets returned into JSON. We can then, deserialize that into a PowerShell object, so we then have access to the object properties, in terms of the port that it's listening on and the IP addresses and all that sort of information. Okay, so let's switch over to the PowerShell ISE. So let me zoom this in a bit. So people can see this. So what we have here is obviously the PowerShell integrated scripting environment. I'm just going to run through some demos of working with JSON and JSON objects before we look at connecting to the Nitro API and authenticating. Okay. So here we have a JSON string, which denotes an object, which has a login object, which is comprised of a username, password, and timeout. So we have a JSON string that potentially we want to pass to the NetScaler, or we will receive back. So we can run this, and I'm going to convert the JSON string into a PowerShell object. Okay. So here you can see, if we look in PowerShell object now, I'll do this here, and look at the members that we get back from PowerShell, that we can see that in the login property of this PowerShell object that we've got back now, we now have a password, a timeout value, and a username field, and some are strings. So the password and the username is string, and the timeout value is integer. So this has been converted from this JSON string. Okay, I look at just the login object itself, then these are the properties that are available to us. And of course, we can convert to JSON a PowerShell object, so we can serialize a PowerShell object back to JSON if we need to pass it through to the NetScaler. So if I convert our PowerShell object back into JSON again and look at the JSON, you'll see that this looks very, very similar down here to the original JSON that we started with. I have formatted it slightly differently so we can see that it's different. But this is valid JSON, and it's passed backwards and forwards. And this is obviously important when it comes to looking at the actual API itself. So when it comes to looking at the Nitro APIs, obviously Citrix provide us with an SDK that's available, so we can find out what all the API endpoints are, what all the valid properties and methods and things that we can call. So if you've got a MyCitrix login, you can log into the MyCitrix portal, and on the NetScaler downloads page is the API documentation, which is provided as a tarball, which you need to unzip. So you'll need to use something like 7-zip or something to extract that. But here you can see that we have the documentation that is just extracted. And if we open up the index.html page, then we can see here are all of our API endpoints. So these are all the configuration items within a NetScaler that we can configure, and there's a lot of them. So if we wanted to look at, for argument's sake, access gateways, then we have a VPN vServer endpoint that we can hit, and you can see all of the read and write properties that are available on this, on this API endpoint itself. So you can type this stuff into the browser, as Barry mentioned. So if I was to try and browse the API endpoint, Nitro v1 vpnv server. No.
v1/config.
Config, yeah. Thank you, Barry. It's going to ask us to authenticate against the endpoint. Notice I'm using HTTP at the moment. Obviously, you need to have NetScaler installed with certificates on the management interface to be able to manage these via HTTPS. I'm going to use my very secure username and password. And you can see that this is returning all of the individual access gateway endpoints that are available on this NetScaler appliance. There's only one here, but as you can see, there are a lot of properties. And this is native JSON that we're getting back. Now, if you're going to look at browsing and working with the APIs, you may want to install a browser extension, so I use Postman, but there are other extensions available, and there are some available for Firefox as well. But this will allow you to browse API endpoints. Okay, so if I was to look at populating this API, I've just got rid of it, so I'll just type it in again. So this will allow us to browse the API endpoint of the NetScaler and browse, and it gives us stuff back in a nice visual format. Makes the all of the properties and things a bit easier to read. Okay, and you can play obviously with headers, and so you can do puts and gets and all that sort of stuff. Natively against the Nitro API. So this just makes it a little bit easier for us to see. So we can see the JSON that we've got back. We've got an array of VPNV servers, and here's one. So I have a remote.lab.local, and you can see the IPv4 address, the port it's listing on, and all that sort of stuff. It's makes it a lot easier to do that. So that's kind of browsing the API and a brief introduction to JSON. So digging back into working with the API in PowerShell in a bit more detail. So if you look in the documentation script that Barry's got available, there are some functions in there for working against the Nitro API. There's a whole raft of functions that are available as part of the documentation framework that Carl makes available. But first and foremost, we need to create a session with the NetScaler, so we need to authenticate against it, and then we need to maintain that session whilst we're querying all the API endpoints. So we're authenticating against the NetScaler, and then we're querying each API endpoint that we're interested in, getting PowerShell objects back, and then we're formatting them, using the documentation framework to produce a Word report or an HTML report or a text document. Yeah. So here, what we are doing is we are purely connecting to the NetScaler API. So we're going to use the invoke REST method, but the first thing we need to do is we need to hit the login API endpoint. Okay, so we're going to connect to this API endpoint. We're going to use the HTTP post method, not a get. So we need to send information in the body of the HTML request, and we need to pass it through the username, the password, and we need to specify a timeout as well, and this is in seconds. So here I'm just creating a JSON body that obviously the NetScaler can consume, and then I'm going to call that. So we're calling this endpoint, we're using the post method. This is the data we want to send to the NetScaler appliance, so we need to tell it there's type JSON. It does support XML, or the older versions used to support XML. And then what session do I want to store? What session variable am I going to store my information in? So let me just call this. So we're just going to invoke this REST method, and then let's have a look. Okay, so now we have a PowerShell commands web request session object, and then let's look at the contents of that. So here, and you can see that there's some cookies and all that sort of stuff. So we've now connected, and we have a variable. So if I was to look at variables that I've got, you can see that I now have an NS session variable. So I can use this and pass this into each of the API requests that I want to make to query the API. That information, that the authentication header effectively goes with it. So let's look at querying the API. So I've just got some examples here of querying the API using the native Invoke Web Request. So this is using the equivalent of using a browser. So those screenshots that Barry showed you earlier on, I can invoke a web request, okay, using the session variable that I got, and I can put the response into a PowerShell variable. So if I call the API, the term invoke, let me try doing the whole line. Then we're getting a response back. And if I look at the content, this will look just like what Barry showed you. Okay, so this is what you get when you browse. Using a browser, you get, just kind of a string of text, and that is literally what it is that we've got back. So we can convert that into JSON if we wish to do so. So we can say, I want to convert from JSON, I'm going to convert that response into a PowerShell object. And now when I look at this, you can see that I have a PS custom object, and I actually have a config objects. Okay, so if I was to look at that, okay, you can then see I've got various objects, etc. So now I have an object, a PowerShell object that I can work with and I can query. So these are all of the API endpoints that are available to us. So this is what you'll see in the documentation is you'll see documentation for each of these endpoints. So you can see that there's a lot of API endpoints on a NetScaler that we can query, and also you can update NetScalers as well. So you can create VPN load balancers and monitors and VPN gateways and all sorts via the NetScaler API, and we do that internally, probably beyond what we need to do in this webinar. So that's using the Invoke Web Request, which is the standard kind of HTTP request that you'll get in a browser. If we use the Invoke REST method instead, okay, it looks almost, well, it's exactly the same, other than we are using a different commandlet, and we're going to store it in a different variable at the end. But this does the serialization and deserialization for us. So we don't need to be concerned about converting to and from JSON, or converting from JSON into PowerShell object. The Invoke REST method will do that for us. If I look at the results of this now, you'll see that this looks just like we did when we invoked the standard web request and then did that deserialization conversion into a PowerShell object from JSON for us. So if I was to change this for Invoke REST method object, response even, you can see that we've automatically got all of this information available to us. So that's just differences between the two methods. Here we are going to invoke the NS feature endpoint. So if I was to look in the documentation, let's see if we can find this. So I think it's under system. So system, it'd be nice if there was a search in here. Oh, no, that for certain. I can't remember. NS feature. So configuration for feature resource. So this is going to return all of the features and the status within the, on the NetScaler. So the NetScaler I've got, there is a license on there. It's licensed with the VPX Express license, I think. So, we will see what comes out of this. So if I invoke this REST method, you see that we've got an array of features in here, and then for each feature we've got some information. So let's view this in a bit more information. So you can see here that we now have a PowerShell object that tells us what each of the features and whether they're enabled or not. So load balancing, so traffic management, so load balancing is enabled, SSL is enabled, access gateway is enabled, all the other features are disabled. Okay. And if we wanted to change this, now that we have a PowerShell object, we could go in, change a property to true, and then we could post that response back to the NetScaler, and it would enable that feature for us. Retrieve all the load balance and all the monitors. So we're calling the load balance monitor endpoint here. Let's just do this. Let's select all of these. So we've called the endpoint, and now you can see that these are all the monitors that are available on the NetScaler. And of course, because we've got a PowerShell object, we have various properties. We can now do select and where and for each over all of these sort of things. You can see that we got a total of 22 down here. Yeah. So there's this storefront monitor down here, which is obviously a custom one for our NetScaler gateway access VPN server. So let's look at here. So here's the endpoint for retrieving all the load balance monitors. If I want to retrieve a particular one, I just need to append the name to the URL. That's going to send us back the JSON results, which are going to be deserialized. So let's have a look at this individual monitor here. So you can see that we now have a load balance monitor come back, and these are all of the properties. So monitor name, the type, and these are all going to be integer values and all that sort of stuff. So it's a nice, easy way of, sending a request to the NetScaler, getting the information back, and then we can use this information to generate documentation in this example. There is also a stats endpoint as well. So there's a config endpoint, and then there's a stats endpoint. So we can retrieve statistics from a NetScaler. So if I wanted to look at vServer statistics, then I can invoke that, and then if I look at this object that I get back, as you can see that we got total request bytes and response rate and all that sort of stuff. So it's pretty cool. Very, very easy. Once you understand how REST works and the API endpoints are available to you, and that is the problem with REST, is because it is unstructured, you have to know what the endpoints are and the data that the API is after to get that information. And of course, we can query for the VPN vServer statistics as well. So let's have a look at those. So you can see total requests and responses. I'm assuming if I hit that, if I actually hit this, assuming I can log in, I should have some more traffic hitting that API endpoint now. So you can see that the number of responses have gone up and total request bytes. So that is, in a nutshell, how we use the API under the hood. So there are various endpoints that we're hitting. We're getting back PowerShell objects. We're then converting them into tables and things that are then exposed and put out by the documentation framework that Carl's put together. Now, working with the REST API is great for us, because obviously we need to do that. For general purpose NetScaler administration in PowerShell, there is actually a PowerShell module that's available from Brandon that is available on GitHub. It is open source. It is also available on the PowerShell gallery, and what it does is it gives us a nice, easy way of querying for things that have been put into the module. And this is where it kind of falls down, is there isn't full coverage. Okay, so I have committed to Brandon, submitting some of the stuff that we use internally for configuring NetScaler. So in version 11 of the API, you can upload things like license files and certificates using the REST API. So it just makes it a lot easier to, bring a NetScaler up from scratch. We've fully automated, with the exception of giving it an initial IP address, because we use Hyper-V for configuring the entire NetScaler, and we can upload SSL certificates as well as do the certificate chaining and all that sort of great stuff. Yeah. So there is a PowerShell module that's available here. So if I just quickly run this, I'm running version 5 of PowerShell. I'm running on Windows 10. So I'm running version 5, but if you install version 5, it's available down to Windows 7. I think the PowerShell wget package management commandlets are available as a separate download as well. So you can download this directly from PowerShell. So I'm just doing a find module, telling you I want to use PowerShell gallery. This is going to go away and find PowerShell modules. You can see the latest version on the gallery is 1.1.2. I'm going to import PowerShell module. I've already got it installed on my machine. If I wanted to install it, then instead of doing find module, I could just do install module, okay, instead. So now we're going to connect to the NetScaler. Notice that this is a lot nicer in terms of how we're going to connect. So we can connect using the Connect NetScaler, give it a host name that we want and a credential. If you wanted to use HTTPS, you could. It'll fail because the certificate trust isn't there on this machine. But if I run this, I'll authenticate. I now have a session, and instead of hitting that API endpoint, I can just call get NS feature. And again, this should look like, what we saw previously, just the REST APIs have been wrapped in PowerShell commandlets that make it nice and easy for you to consume. Getting the monitors, again, very straightforward. Getting a particular monitor, so I'll tell it that I want a particular monitor. This is the same monitor that we got previously. And again, the same for the virtual server. So here what I'm doing is I've included in the NetScaler module, and rather than just get, which is typically what you'll see with the Nitro API, there are a whole load of commands to do with set. So if I were to do a get command, if I push tab and say module NetScaler, these are all the commands that are currently available in there. So you can see that there are a lot of like set NetScaler hostname, setting a load balancer, service group, and a virtual server, and setting the time zone. So there are a lot of additional commandlets that are available in here, and obviously it allows you to create new objects as well from here. So here I'm just going to use, if I was to try and view an existing comment, I'll get an error because comment doesn't exist. It's not been set on this load balancer virtual server. If I call the set, this is just saying set on this load balancer, set the comment to mycugc.com. And then if I select, I think I'd need to select the whole line rather than just that. So now you can see that on the NetScaler appliance has now set the comment to this load balancer to this comment. So let me just check. Let me prove there's no smoke and mirrors going on here, because we know what the demo gods are like. So load balancing virtual servers, edit. There you go, set my comments here. Yeah. So it just gives it a nice, easy way of working with the Nitro API in a more PowerShell friendly way. If you want full access to the Nitro API, then you've got the Invoke REST method, and as long as you know the API endpoints and the data that it's asking for, it's incredibly easy to configure that as well. So here are some of the resources that people have mentioned. So here's where you can get that NetScaler module. It's up on GitHub. There is a license now and a contribution guideline, so feel free to go up there and grab that. Carl scripts are available from his downloads page. He's got them for AD, DNS, all sorts, as well as NetScaler storefronts Storefront, Storefront's the latest one that's gone up there. So if you need to document Storefront as well, you can go up there and grab them. If you want access to the PowerShell scripts that are being used in this presentation and demonstration, then you can go and grab them from up on GitHub. I posted them up there, so they're all up there. They're very simple, but if you just want to go and have a play and grab some of that information, then you can do. And then I think I hand back over to Barry.
Yeah, let's see. Right, here we go. So back to the NetScaler documentation script and what's new in version 3. Obviously the Nitro API we used, but that gives us access to some new information as well, which was not in the ns.conf. Information like, so what we did before we had the Nitro API, we could just report on the things that were in the ns.conf, so like the host name, the version, which we see in the screenshot. Now, if you look at the same documentation in the v3 script, we can report on a lot more information. So we still have the host name there, and we can also now report on the NetScaler edition. So we now know it's a Platinum edition. We also know the amount of SSL VPN licenses, and we also get back the NetScaler hardware information. So this is a virtual appliance which will always report the 450 and the rest like this. But you also get the host ID, the host MAC address, and which you can use for licensing as well. So if your license expires or you need to download your license for whatever reason, the host MAC address is there. The serial number, obviously more important for MPX and SDX models, and not so much for VPX, but it's there. So this is all information we couldn't get out before. And so the next one is that also the non-default information we can report on. And an example for this is the NetScaler routing table. So this is what we reported on before. So all manually added routes were documented on, and now you'll see that we will just report all the routing table information. Because Nitro just throws out the complete routing table instead of just the manually added route. Well, of course, because we now utilize Nitro, we can schedule the running of the NetScaler documentation script. So that means that we can now just schedule it like run every month. This was a feature request right from the beginning when we started with the script. So we're quite happy to be able to do that now. One of the questions I saw when Iain was doing his demos was that the password, the NS root password, was in the script. That was for demo purposes only. So we have added a variable which you add when you start the script. And when you don't, it will ask for it. It will save it into a variable, but it won't be saved in the script itself or in a separate file or anything. So every time you run the script, you will need to add that password as well. For security reasons, a valid question, of course. We have also added NetScaler 11 updates, so new functionality in NetScaler 11, new options. As we are now utilizing Nitro, new functionality will also be added to the script much faster. It's much easier now because we don't have to dig in to find what options are now there. It will just throw the options and we can utilize them fairly easy. So you will see that when 11.1 or 11.5 or 12 or whatever the next version is called will be released, we will also be able to update the NetScaler documentation script much faster to support it. One other feature that has been requested more and more lately is the support for Office 2016. Carl Webster has already updated his documentation templates. I just didn't update the documentation script, or the NetScaler documentation script itself. So of course, when we release this, we will also support Office 2016. So one last thing. So we were now that we've shown the Nitro API, we are quite lucky that Citrix implemented pretty much the same API for other products, which means it's fairly easy to utilize the same script for other products. So we started with a basic configuration to show you today, and that's the CloudBridge configuration script. So when we look at the Nitro API, what I said before, it's quite similar. It's not the same, but it's quite similar, and it's fairly easy to use it for the CloudBridge. Some of you might know the CloudBridge, which was called NetScaler before, and it had some other names as well. So we will eventually release a CloudBridge documentation script as well, and I'm looking at a timeline of, let's say, May, June release for that. So any questions about the presentation so far?
There's a question here, Barry, in the chat, or in the questions about from Christopher. Since PowerShell is based on .NET, can we replicate scripts in other .NET languages like C#? Yes, is the simple answer to that. Would it be easy? Probably not. So there are two parts to the documentation script. One is querying the APIs for information. So the script connects to the, well, it used to read the nsconfig file. Now it reads or communicates with the API, gets all the information back. It then talks to Carl's documentation framework that then drives Word via the COM object model to add paragraphs and tables and things. So in answer to the question, yes, you can do it. Would it be painful in doing it directly in .NET? Possibly. Yeah, you'd have to drive Word as a first and foremost. I know there are .NET libraries available for that, but yeah, talking to Word, particularly older versions, and supporting all of the versions is not going to be an easy feat, that's for sure. So someone's asking Carl to get on it.
Yeah. He's not online, but we will send him your questions or your feature requests.
Yeah, and you can drive PowerShell from C# as well, so you can invoke a PowerShell run space and then call the script and let it do its thing and get the results back as well.
So I see another question from Joseph Wolf. Is the new documentation script available? To be completely honest, I planned to have it available today, but there are just some things not quite right yet. So I need some more time, but I expect it to be out in 1 or 2 weeks. And if you're really anxious to try it out, just find me on Twitter and I'll drop you a early version. But the 2.5 script is still on Carl Webster's website, which will still work for most configurations anyway.
Mm-hmm. Is the new script any quicker, Barry, than the old one?
Well, we're not in marketing ourselves, so let's be honest. No, it's not quicker. It's actually a bit slower. And the reason for that is that the ns.conf is a text file we are parsing, and that's fairly fast to do. The NetScaler script connects to the HTTP API, so it's not as quick, but for what I've seen, it's a difference of, in my test setup, of 2.5 minutes in the older version, in the 2.5 versions, and about 4 minutes in the version 3. It depends on the amount of configuration you have in your NetScaler. So if you have 10 load balancers, it's quicker than when you have 100 load balancers.
Yeah, no, just didn't know whether you'd done any benchmarking on a new version yet, that was all. The benefit, of course, is you're getting more information, and you still don't have to type it manually. So. Yeah,
so we get more information, and it's also what we explained with the non-defaults not being in the ns.conf. It's also, we can trust on the information better than what we did before. So I'm not saying we found anything that's wrong, but it might be wrong along the way when Citrix changes default values. So now we are absolutely sure that the information we report on is actually the information that the NetScaler is using at that time.
Mm-hmm. Okay. There's a couple more questions that have come in. So, question from Mark Hutchinson: will the slide deck and the resource links be made available?
Yeah, it's recorded and it will be made available on the My CUGC website. Mm-hmm. I don't know, Stephanie, when will it be released?
We will try to have the recording up tomorrow.
Okay, great, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Another question: are the templates for JSON public knowledge? So that's from Christopher. So Christopher, I presume you're referring to the Nitro API and the JSON that you get back, etc. It's all available in the Nitro API SDK, but you do need a My Citrix logon to be able to download those documents. To the best of my knowledge, I don't think they're available publicly. Okay. There's a question from Patrick asking you to show the outputs with your scripts. Have you got an example word output, Barry, at all?
Mm-hmm.
An early version.
I'm looking for it. So this is on the screen right now. The Word document, I guess.
Yep.
Yeah. So this is the actual output of the script. So what you can see is that this is all new. So the edition hardware, that's all new.
Cool. Does it output into different formats? So I know you've got Word there, but can it output into HTML text?
Yeah, so we can output in any other format that's supported by Carl Webster's his script framework. So that's PDF and HTML right now.
Yep.
And Word, obviously.
Yep. There might be more coming in the future as well.
Yeah. So what's interesting to see as well is when we scroll all the way down is that so remember when I was talking about the non-defaults not being in the ns.conf, we would only see the bottom 6 monitors, because the other ones are all default monitors which are always on the NetScaler system.
Yeah. So if it wasn't in the config file, so the ns.conf file, we couldn't report it, right?
Yeah, exactly. So and now we can. So the whole documentation output is now complete. Also with the default configuration.
Excellent. Good job.
So I don't see any more questions. Let's check the chat. Nope. No network pictures. There's this question by Patrick Markula. No network pictures. No, we haven't done that yet. Maybe Iain can create a
Whoa.
video.
Don't put words in my mouth.
No. No, you still have to do that yourself. Sorry. So on that final note, I think we will end the webinar for today.
Okay. Thank you, guys. Let me want to thank everyone for joining us today, and thank you, Barry and Iain, for taking the time. If you're not already a member, I'd like to encourage you to join the CUGC online community, where you'll find a discussion thread in our forum and a recording of today's presentation. Tomorrow, you'll receive a short email survey, which we hope you'll fill out, as your feedback helps us plan our upcoming events. I'd also like to remind you to check out our full webinar lineup under the Events tab at mycugc.org. And finally, if you have any topic ideas for future webinar events, please send them to us at hq@mycugc.org. Thank you, everyone. Hope you have a great day. Thank you, Barry. Thank you, Iain.
Yeah,
You're
thank you.
welcome. Thank you.
All right.